G'day folks, ZiggyD here with a bit of a video about day one, covering some of my thoughts, impressions, early discoveries, and also a little bit of a guide to the league mechanic, at least for starting off. Before you do anything else though, open your options menu, go to the input menu here, scroll all the way to the bottom, use portal scroll, bind this to something, I suggest T for town portal, and then wherever you are, you can just press T and open up a portal using one of your portal scrolls automatically. T click, oh, so good, a game changer, it feels amazing. Ready? 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 Look at this. Bam. Bam. So good. Alright, so the first thing I noticed, and that you might notice, is the new spice they've sprinkled into the early parts of the campaign. I was really hoping that this would be the full campaign, and it sounds like they're going to come back and add more stuff later on. But the first couple acts have some new things, just kind of filling out some of the zones, making things a bit more interesting in those early portions of the game, and a fair bit more rewarding as well. So the first thing you'll probably run into is the Granddaddy Crab is now an essence monster. That makes that fight a lot spicier, as you'll have an essence modifier. You'll also get an extra essence, but also a fair bit more loot, as of the kind of rarity boost on the monster ended up giving me a ton of rares. The next one was a Legion in the Climb, and that was, I was expecting to be terrible, because usually Legion, if your character's, not quite cooking yet, is pretty awkward, but they seem to make it actually pretty generous and well balanced for low level characters. So you go around breaking out all of the chests, and you actually get a ton of loot for that point in the game. So all of a sudden I'm swimming in rares, even if you don't have any league mechanic interactions at that point. You have a ton of loot. So it seems like every league we're going to have some good leveling gear for characters right from the outset from these sorts of early encounters. There was a few other things sprinkled around, sort of minor stuff, like a hidden room in the prison that gave some flasks, although mine was bugged and didn't drop anything, but other people got tons of quicksilvers and stuff. So there's some things there. Another one was in Act 2, there's a bunch of rituals sprinkled around, and a little bit later on you encounter a mini corruption chamber that single corrupts an item, which that one's, I think, kind of useless, but apparently you can make Vile Gems with it, which is unusual, but otherwise, just overall a lot more interesting. So some fun little stuff sprinkled around the campaign. If they take this to some of the more boring areas in part 2, like Grain Gate and whatever, that just don't have anything interesting going on, and they put some, cool encounters in there, in addition to the league mechanics that start naturally cropping up as you progress, then campaign's gonna be a lot more fun. I know a lot of people want campaign skips, but they're not gonna do that, right? Another good solution, at least, is to make the campaign as interesting as possible, and this is a step in the right direction there, so I'm pretty happy with that. Now, talking a bit about the league mechanic, and I will make a little bit of a beginner's guide for you in a second, but first, just some thoughts. Considering it's unskippable, it's actually fairly unobtrusive. You can't avoid it, right? Even if you don't click the lantern and go into a zone, they'll just be applied randomly, effectively. But although sometimes you'll run into some pretty hard things, and there's a few mods that are a little iffy, like for example, Elemental Ailment Reflection. So if you're freezing enemies, you'll just freeze yourself. So I actually have a freeze immune flask as soon as possible. I got a Quicksilver early on, and I kept that thing the whole time because it was very useful for that. So apart from a few modifiers here and there, it doesn't get in your way too much. And compared to some league mechanics where I spent a long time doing them and take a really long time to complete the campaign, I actually completed the campaign in a fairly normal, for me at least, amount of time, and not a massive excessive. So it doesn't really expand the length and duration of the campaign that much if you engage in it, because you're just killing the monsters you're killing anyway, and then occasionally dipping off and doing a little bit of crafting. So on that note, just throwing kind of 1 to 3 corpse crafted items just to fill out bad slots felt pretty okay. I didn't expect to be able to meta craft any GG perfect items while leveling, right? Because the time and investment and trying to get all the corpses to do that sort of thing, it doesn't really make sense for items you're going to replace soon anyway. But whenever I'm I don't have any, I've just got some random blue gloves, or I've got no, good rings, then you can just choose the exact slot you want. So if you need good rings, you can just print rings. You can do single corpse crafts and just make a ring, make a ring, make a ring, and you'll get something good, right? You'll get something usable pretty easily. So it was definitely that, combined with the extra rares from the special encounters at the start of the campaign, meant that my character was pretty kitted out for the whole leveling process. It's kind of not really an excuse to not have a good set of full rares at any point while leveling with this league mechanic right now. Another little surprise initially was I didn't expect the All Flames system. That's the thing where you can replace mobs from a zone with something else. We talked about the frogs and how funny that is, but I didn't really expect this to be a significant thing. I was just it doesn't really seem that interesting to me, but I noticed that you are actually getting some pretty interesting stuff here. Quite regularly I was getting expedition monsters that will drop things like expedition, like remnants or whatever little bits and pieces that you need, the currency for the expeditions. So I was able to, you know, buy like 8 chaos from Tujin while leveling. I actually ended up with like 20-ish plus chaos while leveling, which was enough to buy myself a pretty nice set of like unique items to make activate like a low life gem level scaling playstyle that I'll talk a bit about later on. So my campaign experiences with the League mechanic were, it didn't wow me. I didn't really expect it to for this particular mechanic. Crafting based things are not really usually that interesting while leveling, but and it's certainly not as powerful as like borrowed power of like the other ascendancies for leveling and whatnot. But I didn't hate it. It felt alright. So reasonable first impressions from that. I'm much more interested to see what it feels like at endgame and what we can do with the crafting as we sink a bit further into it, and how it's going to juice the maps. I think the thing that looks like it might be better than I expected is the map juicing portion of things with the replacing of monsters in the map. There's some interesting and weird stuff going on. Like I had one that was these meat sacks, these large, very tanky single mobs. You replace entire packs with them and you only get one single mob. But when they were rare, they seemed to give a ton of items and also a lot of XP. I had them juiced up with one of the devotion modifiers that gave them a ton of experience gain. So I was getting like 5-10% XP off single mobs. They were very tanky though for my character just entering maps. But when they were like magical white, they weren't giving any items really, but then when they were rare, they were giving tons of items. So there's definitely some like things to explore here with this like mob replacement system. Like I think there's going to be some mapping strategies here combining devotion modifiers and some of these monster replacement systems. Alright, so now a quick basic guide to the League mechanic. So you'll see on each zone entrance, it has to not be a waypoint, but rather an actual zone entrance. You'll see this Lantern of Aramor here where you can tinker with these modifiers to move them around between monsters. I found that you don't really need to worry too much about this and you can just click on the zone entrances and go in. The mechanic will still be active. You'll just miss the occasional opportunity to make things a little bit easier on yourself or slightly more rewarding. So for example, you might get a modifier that like makes it so that monster enemy spells hinder you. If you put it on a crab that doesn't cast spells, then it won't do anything, right? So it'll be a free modifier. So you'll miss chances to do that, and occasionally you'll miss chances to place the devoted, the gold modifiers that give extra rewards on slightly more rewarding monster types. So you might get something that gives a bunch of like boosted drop rate, but it spawns on one of these packs that has fewer amounts. So you can see pack density normal here, sometimes that'll be low, and depending on the random distribution of that, that might be worth moving around to a higher density pack of monsters that has more monsters in it or something like that, to be able to better take advantage of those rewards. But it's not significant enough that you have to mess with that each and every single zone. So if that is annoying to you and slows you down, don't feel too bad about just kind of skipping that. The basic idea is that the more of these you kill, the more chance of devoted modifiers in any connected adjacent zones. So they have to be like the tunnel, the refinery, or the belly of the beast. The more chance of those having those devoted gold extra rewarding modifiers. I found that it's not really something that like you're going to be like wanting to full clear zones while moving through the campaign or anything like that. You know, just kill monsters as you go, as you normally would. Also, the more of the haunted monsters you kill, the more chance you have of running into some of the anguished versions of them, which will leave behind a corpse when you kill them. So you can see these guys here are soldier haunted, which means they have one of the haunting. It comes up again below their name there. So they'll have one of those modifiers there. But if you see one with like a bunch of black smoke around it, that's one of the anguished ones that will leave a corpse. Here we go, there's one here. So soldier haunted and it's unresolved anguish. So when you kill this guy, he'll leave a corpse that you can then click the collect button to make the grave digger come and collect. You don't need to stick around for this guy, you can just click the button and run. There is a somewhat limited amount of slots for these corpses at 64, but you will probably only fill that up like maybe once in a run through the campaign, maybe twice. I used them a fair bit and probably maybe got like 2 full lists in total. But if you do have a bunch of modifiers that you just aren't going to use or can't be bothered, you can click the incinerate button here to burn them off. So in the campaign, it's pretty unobtrusive and you don't, I think, need to worry about it too much. Just clear through zones as you normally would, occasionally taking advantage of a little bit of fiddling here and there for any more substantial zones that you're going to run in or you know you're going to spend a bit more time killing monsters in, and just try and get a little bit of extra benefits passively out of there. I didn't find it too much harder than normal campaign, but my leveling build was pretty strong, so it might depend. If you're struggling a bit while leveling, and you would be anyway, then you might run into some stuff that's a bit harder. There are some modifiers, for example, that like do some kind of nasty things, like for example, reflecting elemental ailments. So if you're freezing enemies, you'll freeze yourself. So those modifiers you want to try and pop on the least common monsters possible if they're going to be an issue for you, and make sure to have like a freeze immune flask. I got one early on and it carried very nicely through some of those nasty modifiers. After you've got a few corpses, and anytime you have a lacking slot that you want to try and improve, like maybe you just don't have very good boots, or you don't have any rings or amulets that are doing anything for you, then you can come over to the Necropolis to fill those slots out. So corpses have certain modifiers, and if you've done any fossil crafting, you'll be familiar with some of the concepts at play here, though it goes a little bit deeper than some of those. A key thing to know is you can pick whatever item type you want. So after I plant something, if I do like this attack modifier tier rating corpse here, after I plant that, I can then pick whatever item I want. I can pick a weapon, I can make it specifically a dagger, or I can even make it a runic dagger if I want instead, or I can pick a ring or an amulet or boots or whatever. So not every modifier that you have on these corpses will necessarily correspond to what you put in. If I do attack modifiers and put in boots, that's probably not going to do anything, but it will still produce a rare pair of boots. So if I just want to try and fill up that slot, then I can go ahead and plant that corpse, click craft, choose the boots, and it'll give you the exact list of what you're going to make here. The expected item level, which is the combined average of the monsters that you put in with a bit of a grace. So if you do like a level 17 corpse and a level 30 corpse, it'll probably be a level 30 item. But if you do like a level 17 corpse and a level 68 corpse, it'll probably be like a level 30 or 40 item. So it goes up a bit, but to a certain limit. So you eventually will want to ditch some low level corpses if you've hoarded some of them for a long time. But you can certainly, there's a bit of kind of wiggle room there while you're progressing through the campaign, which is really nice. I imagine the restrictions there might be a little bit tighter at endgame, where you'll want to try and use more higher level ones, but I'll experiment with that in the coming days. It'll also give you the expected explicit modifiers here, which can be boosted by specific mods. But if we just want to produce the item,
you may grace them with fleetness.
he does his chant, and you get a random rare, right? Like effectively a random rare. I had attack modifiers, so that did nothing to the item. It just produced a rare pair of boots at random. Nice. If, however, you want to make something specific, then what you want to think about is like pairing stuff. So let's say you want a fire wand for your fire build that you're leveling. You want to try and get like plus fire gems or added fire damage or increased fire damage or things like that. There's a handy search bar here. You'll want to type fire, and then you're going to have 2 different types of mods, or maybe 3 different types of mods that you're looking at here. So the first one is what I've got here, which is increased chance of fire modifiers. So you can stack this as well. So 200% will make it a little bit more likely to see fire modifiers compared to other things. You'll probably, on average, most of the time have a fire mod when you do one like that. But when you start to get like, 600, 800, 1000%, then you're basically guaranteed to get some or actually many fire modifiers. When I stacked a bunch of life modifiers, for example, I would pretty much always get life and regen, right? Because that's also a life modifier. The other key modifier, though, is actually this one here, plus 50 to lightning modifier tier rating. My understanding so far of this is that it effectively boosts the minimum tier of lightning modifiers up, so it will help you ensure that you get on average a better lightning modifier. It's not guaranteeing that you're going to get a top tier roll, but it is at least guaranteeing that your minimum is going to be a bit higher than the bottom. This is kind of like based on the hidden tier weighting system on PoEDB, which you can see in data mine information if you're interested in. So basically it might be that like the bottom tier of lightning resistance is 40 weighting, so adding 50 will ensure that you at least get into the next tier. And it will mean on average that you'll get a higher tier, right, as well. So you can stack these and stack increased chance for lightning, for example, to see either more lightning modifiers on a wand or more chance at lightning resistance and a better lightning resistance in total. But let's go back to that example of making a fire wand. You would do something like increased chance of fire modifiers, stack that with plus modifier tier rating for fire. But then the third thing you can do is block stuff that you don't want. So here you can see physical modifiers are 300% scarcer. If I was making a wand, that would be a pretty good one to do, because then it would ensure or help, not ensure, help me not see increased physical damage, which is not going to be useful for my build, right? So you could put physical modifiers are scarcer, you could do cold and lightning modifiers are scarcer, And you can also mess with some other kind of like meta aspects like that, like for example, focusing on caster. So conversely, you could say increased chance of caster modifiers, because that will tag most of the things you want, and maybe it would help you get cast speed or something else useful. When you're working with armor slots, protective pieces of gear, you can do things like guarantee that it is at least some sort of ES hybrid. So for example, items have an intelligence requirement. If I put one of these in the ground, whenever I craft an armor piece, it will be always at least ES or armor ES or evasion ES, right? It can't be just pure armor or pure evasion. You can also combine this with things like armor items do not have strength requirements. So if I did these two together, then I would either get energy shield or energy shield evasion. Those are my only two options. So you can stack enough of those and you can guarantee the exact type of piece you want, right? Other than that, there's a few other things like armor can roll haunted modifiers. These are unique mods to this system. When you use one of these, it's not guaranteed. As you'll see, it's increased chance of them. So you can stack more of these if you want to be more likely to get them. And it seems like there's going to be some pretty good modifiers. And while leveling, just chuck these on for fun probably, but they're going to be a bit more interesting to mess around with at endgame, I think. Other things to keep an eye out for are additional explicit modifiers. So as we saw before, those boots were going to have 4 mods, and that is indeed what they ended up rolling. You can get +1 explicit modifiers, and if you stack 2 of those, you'll guarantee a 6 property item. I would suggest while leveling it early on, and even maybe an early endgame, you might only want to go to 5 property items, because that leaves an empty slot for you to use the benchcraft to put a resistance or life or something like that you're missing to make it into a much more usable item. So it's not always necessarily better to have a 6 property item compared to a 5 property item. Of course, there's also things to mess with the links, to add an extra socket up to 4 sockets, or re-roll the number of socket links to give you the greatest number of links and things like that to help you get 4, 5, or 6 links. So that's a very basic overview, but I will experiment with it a lot more in the coming days and do a much more nuanced and in-depth, especially endgame guide, as it works a bit differently and is a much more significant endgame system than anything else. So I'll cover that in the future. So some of you may be curious about my build. I did want to kind of dive into the unknown a bit with the new Tornado gem. I thought it looked guaranteed to at least be decent. Not guaranteed to necessarily be good, but I have to say I'm pretty happy with the results so far for leveling. I managed to get one basically as early as possible. You can get it from, in theory, normal lab, but don't try and farm it yourself if you're on trade. It's like 1 or 2 chaos. I bought it for 2 chaos very early on, and then started rocking it, I believe, level 32 when you can use it. The downsides are that it has a little bit of a slow cast time to put them out, and it doesn't scale with cast speed, so you're not really incentivized to stack a bunch of cast speed, which means it's a little slow to drop those tornadoes. I did end up using some items that just incidentally gave me cast speed, and that made it feel a lot better. So it's a sort of skill where you're going to want a bit of cast speed for quality of life, but it won't scale your damage all that much. The other thing to consider is that it spawns on you, and that's not really a problem while leveling, because you kind of just like run through a pack, drop it on the pack, and keep running. Eventually, also, the tornado movement speed picks up as it levels and gains quality. It gets a lot more movement speed, and the AI on it's very good and very aggressive. It does a very good job of chasing down monsters, even going around corners and through doors and things like that. So overall, I'm very happy with the behavior of it, but there is some things to consider there that, like, it could be a little clunky feeling if you don't have cast speed, and if you kind of want something that's a bit more ranged projection or a projectile sort of feel, then this definitely isn't that. It's a bit like a, aggressive AoE summon raging spirit. Gigantic summon raging spirit, kind of. Really, the only issues I've had with the build so far are economic, like a lack of chromatic orbs to try and get the right gear sockets. I've had to run some pretty suboptimal links here and there, but even still, with just like the gear I was finding as I was leveling here, which was just like kind of okay to decent rares most of the time, it was actually cracked for leveling. Like, I was doing so much damage. It clears packs very well and was obliterating bosses. I just leveled with normal like Magma Orb, Firewall, and Flame Totem early on, switching to Blazing Salvo, which was a lot better than Magma Orb, as soon as possible, and then picking up Tornado at 32, and it felt really good from that point onwards, and I ended up dropping the other support skills. I did end up using, incidentally got a Void Sphere of Rending, which is a physical based spell that just also does a ton of damage, so I used that a little bit while leveling as well, but mostly it was the tornadoes starring, which I later supplemented with a bit of Wave of Conviction, Flammability, Hex Touch, just to debuff enemies further, but it was barely even necessary. A little bit before reaching endgame, I picked up a couple of items to kind of flush out what I'm doing with the build, and I don't have a build guide for you or a planned build really. I am very much making it up as I go along, but I'm playing an Inquisitor with the lingering consecrated ground effects to apply life regen to energy shield regen, so the double regen setup. And Righteous Providence, and I'll probably pick up Augury of Penitence later on, I'm thinking, because there's a few good ways to strip resistances, so Inevitable Judgment doesn't feel as good. But there are many other ways to build this skill. Hatred scaling, gem level scaling, Battle Mage. You can totally do Instruments of Virtue, Battle Mage setups here. So lots of ways to build this, and even other classes I think potentially quite viable too, Elementalist and so on. But I wanted... Tornado looked like a pretty comfy, cozy skill to me. You know, a nice auto-targeting, duration-based skill. And I'm like, that looks like it could be a very cozy build. And one of my most comfortable kind of play styles is builds that have a lot of recovery. And Inquisitor is kind of at the forefront of those. So I wanted to lean into that as much as possible. As such, with the currency I picked up while leveling, I ended up getting a Malachite Simulant. These guys that cost nothing. I ended up getting a Corrupted one with some extra regen, just as a little boost for a couple chaos. An Infernal Mantle that I picked up for 5C, and just threw some Jewelers on to get myself a 6 socket and a 4 link. And a Replica Cold Iron Point. You can totally rock 2 of these. So that's already plus 6 levels, making my Tornado right now gem level 23. And it scales very well with gem levels, both the damage and also the movement speed goes up. And we've got a lot of more movement speed to get out of quality. You get up to 40 move speed with quality, which makes it end up being quite fast. It's just zooming around already right now, so it chases down monsters. It's only like the quickest hasted monsters that are chasing you that might be able to outrun it. So rarely that's been an issue. But the setup I'm using here is that Infernal Mantle gives like a bunch of crit and spell levels, and that's quite cool. But it does make you take increased spell damage when on low mana. So if you reserve your mana with auras, which you always do, you will take a ton of damage. So it's pretty unviable if you do that. But we go Blood Magic with Malachite's Simulant here, and that gets around that issue effectively. And then we are scaling gem levels further with Replica Cold Iron Point. This disables cold damage, and the skill has a cold tag, so it gets the plus levels. And normally it would summon a cold tornado, but this does, of course, work with combat focuses, which can be made via a vendor recipe. You have to use 2 rings. So for this one, you use a lightning and fire ring with a 20 quality prismatic gem. So anything like elemental hit or anything. And that disables the cold version. So it cannot pick the cold tornadoes when I'm using that. So I only get lightning and fire currently. I'll later get another one and make it only fire, as we'll just go that pure route there. But we still get the extra levels and get around that downside there. So taking advantage of the low life Inquisitor setup, I'm doing a couple of things. So we're reserving some auras to get ourselves to low life, which allows us to take advantage of Pain Attunement for more damage. But also we can take advantage of some very nice and cheap items. These are 1 chaos items, Laurie's Lantern for chaos resistance and unlucky damage when we're being hit. Very nice mitigation. And also Duresso's Courage, which gives a ton of block on low life and is generally a pretty nice budget shield. So we get some nice budget items there. And the interesting thing about this, right, is we have like 700 to 1,000, 1,100 regen, right? Life regen and energy shield regen. So if we take damage to both our life and energy shield at the same time, we effectively double our regen. So I'm using Replica Soul Tether, a couple chaos. It gives you extra energy shield, and the Corrupted Soul Keystone gives you extra energy shield. But it makes it so that 50% of non-chaos damage bypasses your energy shield. So when I get hit, it goes half to energy shield, half to life. And that means that my damage is split between those 2 things, and my regen effectively applies twice to recover from that. So I'm rocking the equivalent of 2,000 regen a lot of the time while kind of running around. And that is obviously very, very good recovery, especially at an early level there. And we can further supplement that with Petrified Blood, which I'm doing to add extra mitigation to that life. Because with 2,400 energy shield and 1,500 life would be the thing that'll run out first, but Petrified Blood makes that way, way tankier. So we end up being really tanky and able to stand impacts pretty aggressively with that. So a fun little setup that I'm experimenting with now. And this is kind of leaning into a budget comfortable setup. It's a bit more unique than I'd like to use. Ignore these ones, are just some leveling uniques I found. But it certainly is very comfortable and very effective so far. The only other thing I want to mention is I did pick up Call to Arms, the new automation skill for Warcries, and it is undeniably very powerful to just be auto-casting whatever Warcry you want. So in my case, Enduring Cry for the regen, Endurance Charge generation. That is very nice, but it is kind of annoying. This one wasn't really left clickable unless you picked up a keystone, but I understand people having the same problem with the automation skill. You can disable it in your hideout or when you're on your passive screen or something like that, but you basically have to, otherwise it's kind of annoying because you're effectively sitting here just yelling every so often while you're like in your passive tree. And it may not seem like much, but that gets kind of annoying, so I'm not fully sold on the automation changes. And this is very good, but it is definitely kind of annoying, so something to consider for that. Anyway, folks, that's some of my first thoughts from the League. Bit on the build, bit on the League mechanic. I'll follow up with some more in the future as things grab my interest and attention, as is usual. That is it for now. I'm ZiggyD. Thanks for watching.